Hello friends, this is a video about the suspension. The suspension is a kind of non-chord tone in which a single note begins as a consonant member of a harmony or a consonant point in counterpoint. Then it's held over as the music changes around it so that it becomes dissonant, and then it resolves down by step, finally, to become consonant again. So a suspension is a three-part phenomenon. If you're missing one of these parts, you have some other kind of non-chord tone, not a suspension. So to go over these parts in a little bit more detail, as I said, you'll first have a stage in which the note in question originates as part of a consonant chord. Then you'll have the moment of actual dissonance, the moment of suspension, when the music moves around it and our note is held so that it becomes dissonant. Then finally it resolves down by step, and it becomes consonant again. In effect, it sort of catches up with the music around it, whether that's the bass line and the rest of the harmony, depending on the texture and the context. So you can think of a suspension through this simple little acronym, PSR, preparation, suspension, resolution, and it's usually a very clarifying exercise to go through a piece of music and label the parts of a suspension with P, S, and R to sort of understand how they occur. We'll start with some very clear examples. As you get into more sophisticated examples of suspensions, you'll find that some of these different components are sort of elided together with other events, and they become a little bit harder to detect, but there are still usually vestiges of them there. The other thing I'll say is that suspensions tend to follow a couple of very specific formulae. These formulae are familiar from fourth species counterpoint. The ones that we'll see in this video are 7 resolving down to 6 and 4 resolving down to 3. So let's see this in action. First, I'd like to look at a piece of fourth species counterpoint that I was just using in a class. And we can see this very clearly right at the very end of this example. So we'll sort of block off the first part of this measure, and we'll just look at these notes. So this is bass clef on the bottom, treble clef on the top, so that this example begins with a B and a G. That's a consonant sixth. Then the bass line is going to move down, leaving us with a dissonant seventh, that then resolves downwards to become a sixth again. So, preparation, consonant, suspension, top voice is left to become dissonant, and then that voice resolves downwards, resolution. Then we go to a cadence. So that's a very, very common way to see a simple suspension within a two-voice texture. I'll look at another two-voice texture next, but within the context of a more complicated piece of music. This is a page from William Byrd's Ave Verum Corpus. It's a beautiful polyphonic piece from the Renaissance that I really love to teach, and one of the things that contributes to that beauty is the number of suspensions that Byrd uses in this piece. So I've bracketed one moment here in the bass and the tenor to zoom in a little bit on how one of these suspensions works. So we'll hear this first on the piano, and I'll talk through how the moment works. So just a short moment of music there, but we actually have two different suspensions. So the bass enters first with this descending line, then the tenor follows a moment later in imitation. So as the bass moves from F down to E flat, The tenor joins in on C, which forms a sixth. Then the bass continues downwards to D, which is a seventh, and the tenor follows on the next beat, creating another sixth. So we have here preparation, suspension, resolution. Then as the voices continue, here the tenor moves first down to a fifth, and then a little leap down to a third on Flugseat, and then here on Sanguine in the tenor, the bass is still catching up, we have an octave. The bass leaps up, so the B flat is held. This is the preparation. That B flat is consonant. The bass leaps and makes it dissonant. The bass leaps up to F here. B flat is dissonant against that F, so the B flat is being held and it becomes a suspension, and then it resolves down to a third on the next note, the resolution. Then they wind up finally on an octave once again, a cadence, which often follows a suspension. A suspension is often found immediately before a cadence. It's sort of a moment of drama before the rest and repose that a cadence allows you. So let's hear that one more time. So consonant preparation, dissonant suspension, resolution. Preparation, suspension, resolution. Without the commentary? So one last context that I'd like to look at is how suspensions might work in a more traditionally music theoretical. So one additional context that I would like to look at is more of a part writing context, in the context of tonal harmony, how suspensions might arise, how they might be used. So suspensions can arise in a lot of different ways. They're essentially, in this context, sort of a decorative move, in the sense that you take a harmonic context that admits to variation, or that you can sort of change a note or two, and you're essentially adding suspensions to a simpler harmonic framework. So let me show you what I mean by that. Let's think in C minor, and I'll go ahead and write in a sort of keyboard harmony style. Let's say that we have a progression very simple. Let's assume our Roman numerals might be something like 1, 2, 6, or 2, 6, 5. It will eventually be 2, 6, 5. In fact, let's just say that our context is 2, 6, 5 to 5. So in baseline terms, very simple. This is a nice moment to have a suspension. So let me fill these chords in a bit. Following all the usual rules, trying to hold on to common tones, trying to have other voices move as little as possible. Remembering to raise my leading tone. We might have a context like that. 1, 2-6-5-5. Let's hear it. Something like so once again, that's so when we're writing this middle chord of the sequence, when we're writing this 2-6-5 chord, we're faced with two related issues. Number one, this is a predominant seventh chord, so we have a chord seventh to worry about. And then we have sort of the opportunity to add a suspension here. Now, that suspended note is not going to be the chord seventh. It's actually going to be a different dissonance that we're introducing. So that's an important distinction to get right. If we look at this context, a 2-6-5 chord, we have F in the bass, but really the root of the chord is D, F, A flat, and then C. So C is the chord seventh here. And you'll see that a chord seventh behaves a lot like a suspension, in the sense that it has been prepared, it's being held over here. Then we have the moment where it serves as the seventh, and then it resolves down, in this case, to the leading tone. Now, suspensions need to be held over from the previous note. For a chordal seventh, we also allow it to be prepared from a step downwards. So you could step down from D, if that were in the previous harmony, down to C, and that would also be acceptable preparation of this seventh. We're not really thinking of that note, though. The added suspension that you'll often find in this figure is related to a different pitch. It's actually going to be suspending this sixth. It's suspending the root of the chord. And what I'm going to show you here is how you can hold on to E flat from the previous harmony. Let's erase the stem too. So these notes change, and we have E flat on top going down to D. So that becomes our suspension. If we label the familiar labels, preparation, here's the moment of suspension, and here's the resolution. So it sounds something like this. Original chord. Now I'm going to hang on to that E flat in the top voice. And then it resolves downwards. Then we continue. So in other words, if we just look at the bass, you've gone from that E flat over C, consonant 10th. Now the bass line moves up and we hang on to the E flat. 7 moves downwards to 6th. And then stays and belongs to the 5 chord. So in this context, the figure that we'll use for this is 7-6. So depending on the book, sometimes you see this aligned sort of like this, where the 5 is throughout, and then the 7 goes to 6. Sometimes people will sort of align the 5 more closely with the 6. It kind of depends on your notation software and your book printing. So it will look a certain way, but that's sort of the idea, that it's a 2-6-5 chord. These are the essential figures to tell us what this chord is, but it's being sort of decorated by this 7th resolving to 6th. And this is an ambiguous case because if you look just at this slice, it could look like it's F, A flat, C, E flat. It could look like a seventh chord that's built on F, a 4-7 chord. But that note is resolving, and sort of the more accurate interpretation of this is to take into account the note of resolution rather than the suspension, and to say that this is a 2-6-5 chord. So that's our little introduction to suspensions, or review of suspensions perhaps, where we saw how they arise in the abstract as a three-part event: preparation, suspension, resolution. We saw how they come out in fourth species counterpoint. We saw them in an actual piece of Renaissance music. And then finally, we've looked at them in a part writing harmony exercise context.